How many soldiers does the British Army actually have? The figure normally quoted is about 74,000, and that number is correct. But it isn't the size of the entire British Army. The MOD's actual army personnel figure is 109,480. And sitting beyond the serving army is another population that rarely appears in discussions about its size: former servicemen and women who retain the legal liability to be recalled. In March 2026, the Armed Forces Minister was asked how large Britain's strategic reserve actually is. His answer: 95,000. So does Britain secretly have access to an army of around 200,000 people? No. But understanding why says much more about Britain's ability to mobilise for a major war than the headline figure of 74,000 ever could. As of the 1st of April 2026, the UK regular army stood at 74,370 personnel. That's the figure quoted whenever newspapers report the army has fallen to its smallest size in generations. But the MOD's statistics carry an important qualification. The MOD doesn't say the British Army contains 74,370 people. It says the UK regular army contains 74,370, because reported separately are 4,460 Gurkhas. The Brigade of Gurkhas consist of regular British Army units and personnel, but for statistical purposes, the MOD reports Gurkhas separately from the UK regular forces. That puts the combined figure of 78,830 regular personnel before the volunteer reserve is considered, and the count is nowhere near complete. The next major group is much more familiar: the Army Reserve. As of April 2026, its total strength was approximately 25,800, with 23,580 trained personnel. These are the volunteer reservists who train alongside civilian careers and who can be mobilised for operations. It's what many people still think of as the Territorial Army, although the Territorial Army was renamed the Army Reserve in 2014. But when the MOD constructs its headline army personnel total, the volunteer reserve population used in that table is slightly different: 25,730. Then there's another category: other personnel. In April 2026, that accounted for another 4,920 people. This includes personnel such as Military Provost Guard Service, sponsored reserves, some full-time reserve service personnel, and members of the regular reserve who are currently serving. And now, the MOD's arithmetic closes. UK Regular Army 74,370, Gurkhas 4,460, Volunteer Reserve 25,730, other personnel 4,920. Total UK service personnel, Army, 109,480. So 109,480 isn't an estimate created by adding different manpower pools together. It's the MOD's published army strength under its UK service personnel measure. The familiar 74,370 describes only the UK regular army component within it. But even 109,480 doesn't capture Britain's entire reserve manpower liability. A regular soldier reaches their final day of service. Kit is handed back, the gates close behind them, and they return to civilian life. They are no longer part of the regular army, but the army is not necessarily finished with them. Many former regular personnel retain a reserve liability after leaving. This requires a distinction between two names which sound almost identical. The Army Reserve is predominantly the volunteer force already described. The Regular Reserve consists primarily of former regular personnel who retain a liability for military service. And unlike an Army Reservist, somebody in this population isn't necessarily spending Tuesday evening at an Army Reserve Centre. They may simply be getting on with civilian life, but legally they can still belong to Britain's reserve manpower system, and behind this sits an even broader concept: the Strategic Reserve. On the 18th of March 2026, Parliament's Armed Forces Bill Committee questioned Armed Forces Minister Al Carns about Britain's reserves. Marc Francois asked, "As of today, how large do you estimate the Strategic Reserve to be?" Carnes' answer was remarkably concise: 95,000. That's larger than the entire UK regular army. But there's a critical caveat. The MOD's 109,480 army personnel and the 95,000 Strategic Reserve cannot simply be stacked together to produce a 204,000 person British Army, because the Strategic Reserve isn't an army-only figure. It covers former personnel across the armed forces who retain reserve liability. Carns made that context clear immediately afterwards, describing the different existing arrangements across the Army, Navy and Air Force. And the Commons Library defines the Strategic Reserve as two broad populations, the Regular Reserve and the Recall Reserve. So, Britain's 95,000 Strategic Reservists are not a hidden army of 95,000 trained soldiers sitting in barracks waiting for a phone call. They are former armed forces personnel with different backgrounds, services, skills, ages and degrees of readiness who retain a liability for recall. That distinction matters enormously. Having someone's name on a database is not the same thing as having a soldier ready for war. If Britain suddenly needed tens of thousands of additional personnel, those former servicemen and women would need to be located and contacted. Their circumstances may have changed. Their medical fitness may have changed. Their military skills may have degraded. Some will have been outside the armed forces for years, and the successful recall of 20,000 former soldiers creates the next problem. What units do they join? Who commands them? Where do they train? What weapons do they receive? Where does their body armour come from? Where are the vehicles? And how long does it take before that collection of individuals become a useful military formation? That's the difference between manpower and military capability. A reserve liability tells the government who it may have the legal power to recall. It doesn't automatically produce another division, and Britain's mobilisation system is now being reworked. The Strategic Defence Review put a renewed emphasis on Britain's ability to mobilise in a crisis, and the Armed Forces Bill proposes substantial changes to the Strategic Reserve. One of the most striking is age. Under the existing arrangements, the maximum recall age for many former non-officer personnel is 55. The proposed reforms could increase that maximum to 65. The reforms also seek to standardise reserve liability. Carns explained the problem to the Bill Committee. Different ranks currently have different liabilities. Different services have different liabilities. Under the proposed system, personnel leaving the armed forces would instead have a standardised 18-year reserve liability, subject to the provisions and exceptions in the legislation. Carns told the committee that around 14,900 people leave the armed forces each year. The effect therefore builds over time rather than suddenly adding tens of thousands of older veterans when the legislation takes effect. And by June, the government had put a number on where it expects that process to lead. Carns told the House of Commons that the reforms would likely take Britain from a strategic reserve of 95,000 that could be mobilised to 150,000 over the next 10 years. That is a substantial increase in Britain's potential mobilisation manpower. But potential manpower still isn't the same thing as an operational military force. Which returns to the original question, how many soldiers does the British Army actually have? The answer depends on what is being measured. Measured as the UK regular army, 74,370. Measured with Gurkhas included, 78,830 regular personnel. Measured using the MOD's wider UK service personnel definition for the army, 109,480 personnel. Beyond those serving populations sits Britain's Strategic Reserve, currently approximately 95,000 people. But that's a reserve for the UK Armed Forces as a whole. It's not another 95,000 British Army soldiers. So the sum that produces a British Army of approximately 204,000 doesn't work. It combines populations which measure different things and treats an Armed Forces-wide Strategic Reserve as though it belongs entirely to the army. Britain does not have a 200,000 strong army. And perhaps that's the real problem with the debate over army numbers. The debate obsesses over one number, 74,000. Too small, some argue. It should be 80,000. It should be 100,000. But a country's ability to fight a major war isn't determined solely by how many full-time soldiers happen to be serving on the day the war begins. It's determined by what happens afterwards. How quickly can Britain expand? How many trained people can it bring back? Can it find them? Can it medically clear them? Can it equip them? And most importantly, can Britain turn them into functioning army units? Ukraine demonstrated why mobilisation matters. Russia demonstrated why mobilisation matters. And Britain's own defence planning is increasingly acknowledging the same reality. So the claim that Britain has only 74,370 soldiers isn't exactly wrong. It's answering a very specific question: how many people are in the UK regular army right now? The British Army's published personnel strength is actually 109,480. Beyond it sits a much larger Armed Forces Reserve liability, which the government now intends to expand to roughly 95,000 to 150,000. But the gap between having someone's name on a reserve list and having another trained, equipped and deployable brigade may be the most important number of all.